Book 4, Chapter 13 of Last Days of Pompeii. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ben Wilford. Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Book 4, Chapter 13. Chapter 13. The slave consults the oracle. They who blind themselves in the blind may fool. Two new prisoners made in one night. Impatiently Nadia awaited the arrival of the no less anxious Sophia, fortifying his courage by plentiful potations of a better liquor than that provided for the demon. The credulous ministrant stole into the blind girl's chamber. "Well, Sophia, art thou prepared? Hast thou the bowl of pure water?" "Verily, yes, but I tremble a little. You are sure I shall not see the demon? I have heard that these gentlemen are by no means of a handsome person or a civil demeanour." "Be assured. And hast thou left the garden gate gently open?" "Yes, and placed some beautiful nuts and apples on a little table close by." "That's well. And the gate is open now, so that the demon may pass through it?" "Surely it is." "Well, then, open this door. There! Leave it just ajar. And now, Sophia, give me the lamp." "What, you will not extinguish it?" "No, but I must breathe my spell over its rays. There is a spirit in fire. Seat thyself." The slave obeyed, and Nadia, after bending for some moments silently over the lamp, rose and in a low voice chanted the following rude invocation to the spectra of the air. "Loved alike by air and water, I must be Thessalia's daughter. To us Olympian hearts are given spells that draw the moon from heaven. All that Egypt's learning wrought, all that Persia's Magian taught, won from song or wrung from flowers, or whispered low by a fiend, are ours. Spectra of the viewless air, hear the blind Thessalian's prayer. By Eric those art that shed dews of life when life was fled. By lone Ithaca's wise king, who could wake the crystal spring to the voice of prophecy. By the lost Eurydices, summoned from the shadowy throng, as the muse song's magic song. By the Colchians' awful charms, when fair-haired Jason left her arms. Spectra of the airy halls, one who owns thee duly calls. Breathe along the brimming bowl, and instruct the fearful soul in the shadowy things that lie dark and dim futurity. Come, wild demon of the air, answer to thy votary's prayer. Come, O come!" And no god on heaven or earth, nor the Paphians queen of mirth, not the vivid lord of light, nor the triple maid of night, nor the thunderer's self shall be blessed and honored more than thee. Come, O come! "The spectre is certainly coming," said Sophia. "I feel him running along my hair." "Place thy bowl of water on the ground. Now, then, give me thy napkin, and let me fold upon thy face and eyes. That's always the custom with these charms. Not so tight, though. Gently, gently. There, thou canst not see. See, by Jupiter, no, nothing but darkness." Address, then, to the spectre whatever question thou wouldst ask him, in a low whispered voice, 3 times. If thy question is answered in the affirmative, thou wilt hear the water ferment and bubble before the demon breathes upon it. If in the negative, the water will be quite silent. "But you will not play any trick with the water, eh? Let me place the bowl under thy feet. So. Now thou wilt perceive that I cannot touch it without thy knowledge." "Very fair. Now then, O Bacchus, befriend me. Thou knowest that I have always loved thee better than all the other gods, and I will dedicate to thee that silver cup I stole last year from the burly carpenter butler, if thou wilt but befriend me with this water-loving demon. And thou, O spirit, listen and hear me. Shall I be enabled to purchase my freedom next year? Thou knowest, for as thou livest in the air, the birds have doubtless acquainted thee with every secret of this house. Thou knowest that I have filched and pilfered all that I honestly, that is, safely, could lay finger upon for the last 3 years. and I yet want 2,000 sesterces of the full sum. Shall I be able, O good spirit, to make up the deficiency in the course of this year? Speak. Ha! Does the water bubble? No, all this as still as a tomb. Well, then, if not this year, in 2 years? Ah, I hear something. The demon is scratching at the door. He'll be here presently. In 2 years, my good fellow. Come now, 2. That's a very reasonable time. What? Dumb still? 2 years and a half? 3? 4? Ill fortune to you, friend demon. You are not a lady, that's clear, or you would not keep silent so long. 5? 6? 60 years? And may Pluto seize you. I'll ask no more. And Socia, in a rage, kicked down the water over his legs. He then, after much fumbling and more cursing, managed to extricate his head from the napkin in which it was completely folded, stared round, and discovered that he was in the dark. What? Ho, Nadia, the lamp is gone. Ah, traitress, and thou art gone too. But I'll catch thee. Thou shalt smart for this. The slave groped his way to the door. It was bolted from without. He was a prisoner instead of Nadia. What could he do? He did not dare to knock loud, to call out, lest Arbaces should overhear him, and discover how he had been duped, and Nadia, meanwhile, had probably already gained the garden gate and was fast on her escape. But, thought he, she will go home, or at least be somewhere in the city. Tomorrow, at dawn, when the slaves are at work in the peristyle, I can make myself heard. Then I can go forth and seek her. I shall be sure to find and bring her back, before Arbaces knows a word of the matter. Ah, that's the best plan. Little traitress, my fingers itch at thee, and to leave only a bowl of water too. Had it been wine, it would have been some comfort. While Socia, thus entrapped, was lamenting his fate, and revolving his schemes to repossess himself of Nadia, the blind girl, with that singular precision and dexterous rapidity of motion which, we have before observed, was peculiar to her, had passed lightly along the peristyle, threaded the opposite passage that led into the garden, and with a beating heart was about to proceed towards the gate, when she suddenly heard the sound of approaching steps, and distinguished the dreaded voice of Arbaces himself. She paused for a moment in doubt and terror. Then suddenly it flashed across her recollection that there was another passage which was little used except for the admission of the fair partakers of the Egyptian secret revels, which wound along the basement of that massive fabric towards a door which also communicated with the garden. By good fortune it might be open. At that thought she hastily retraced her steps, descended the narrow stairs at the right, and was soon at the entrance of the passage. Alas! The door at the entrance was closed and secured. While she was yet assuring herself that it was indeed locked, she heard behind her the voice of culminates, and a moment after that of Arbaces in a low reply. She could not stay there. They were probably passing through that very door. She sprang onward, and felt herself in unknown ground. The air grew damp and chill. This reassured her. She thought she might be among the cellars of the luxurious mansion, or, at least, in some rude spot not likely to be visited by its haughty lord, when again her quick ear caught steps and the sound of voices. On, on, she hurried, extending her arms, which now frequently encountered pillars of thick and massive form. With a tact, doubled in acuteness by her fear, she escaped these perils, and continued her way, the air growing more and more damp as she proceeded. Yet, still, as she ever and anon paused for breath, she heard the advancing steps and an indistinct murmur of voices. At length she was abruptly stopped by a wall that seemed the limit of her path. Was there no spot in which she could hide? No apertures? No cavity? There was none. She stopped, and wrung her hands in despair. Then again, nerved as the voices neared upon her, she hurried on by the side of the wall, and coming suddenly against one of the sharp buttresses that here and there jutted boldly forth, she fell to the ground. Though much bruised, her senses did not leave her. She uttered no cry, nay, she hailed the accident that had led her to something like a scream, and creeping close up to the angle formed by the buttress, so that on one side at least she was sheltered from view. She gathered her slight and small form into a smallest compass, and breathlessly awaited her fate. Meanwhile Arbaces and the priest were taking their way to that secret chamber whose stores were so vaunted by the Egyptians. They were in a vast subterranean atrium or hall. The low roof was supported by short, thick pillars of an architecture far remote from the Grecian graces of that luxuriant period. The single and pale lamp, which Arbaces bore, shed but an imperfect ray over the bare and rugged walls, in which the huge stones, without cement, were fitted curiously and uncouthly into each other. The disturbed reptiles glared dully on the intruders, and then crept into the shadow of the walls. Calenus shivered as he looked around and breathed the damp, unwholesome air. "Yet," said Arbaces, with a smile, perceiving his shudder, "it is these rude bones that furnish the luxuries of the hall above. They are like the labourers of the world. We despise their ruggedness, yet they feed the very pride that disdains them." "And whither goes yon dim gallery to the left?" asked Calenus. "In this depth of gloom it seems without limit, as if winding into Hades." "On the contrary, it does but conduct to the upper rooms," answered Arbaces carelessly. "It is to the right that we steer to our bourne." The hall, like many in the more habitable regions of Pompeii, branched off at the extremities into two wings or passages, the length of which, not really great, was to the eye considerably exaggerated by the sudden gloom against which the lamps so faintly struggled. To the right of these allay the two comrades now directed their steps. The gay Glaucus would be lodged tomorrow in apartments not much drier and far less spacious than this, said Calenus, as they passed by the very spot where, completely wrapped in the shadow of the broad, projecting buttress, cowered the Thessalian. "Ay, but then he will have dry room, and ample enough, in the arena on the following day. And to think," continued Arbaces, slowly and very deliberately, "to think that a word of thine could save him, and consign Arbaces to his doom." "That word shall never be spoken," said Calenus. "Right, my Calenus, it shall never," returned Arbaces, familiarly leaning his arm on the priest's shoulder. "And now, halt, we are at the door." The light trembled against a small door deep set in the wall, and guarded strongly by the many plates and bindings of the iron that intersected the rough and dark wood. From his girdle Arbaces now drew a small ring holding 3 or 4 short but strong keys. Oh, how beat the gripping heart of Calenus as he heard the rusty wards growl, as if resenting the admission to the treasures they guarded. "Enter, my friend," said Arbaces, "while I hold the lamp on high, that thou mayest glut thine eyes on the yellow heap." The impatient Calenus did not wait to be twice invited. He hastened towards the aperture. Scarce had he crossed the threshold, than the strong hand of Arbaces plunged him forwards. "The word shall never be spoken," said the Egyptian, with a loud exuberant laugh, and closed the door upon the priest. Calenus had been precipitated down several steps, but not feeling at the moment the pain of his fall, he sprung up again to the door, and beating at it fiercely with his clenched fist, he cried aloud in what seemed more a beast's howl than a human voice. So keen was his agony and despair. "Oh, release me! Release me! I will ask no gold." The words but imperfectly penetrated the massive door, and Arbaces again laughed. Then, stamping his foot violently, rejoined, perhaps to give vent to his long-stifled passions, "All the gold of Dalmatia," cried he, "will not buy thee a crust of bread. Starve, wretch! Thy dying groans will never wake even the echo of these vast halls, nor will the air ever reveal, as thou knowest, in thy desperate famine, thy flesh from thy bones. That so perishes the man who threatened and could have undone Arbaces. Farewell." "Oh, pity! Mercy! Inhuman villain! Was it for this?" The rest of the sentence was lost to the ear of Arbaces as he passed backward along the dim hall. A toad, plump and bloated, lay unmoving before his path. The rays of the lamp fell upon his unshaped hideousness and red upward eye. Arbaces turned aside that he might not harm it. "Thou art loathsome and obscene," he muttered, but thou canst not injure me. Therefore thou art safe in my path. The cries of Calenus, dulled and choked by the barrier that confined him, yet faintly reached the ear of the Egyptian. He paused and listened intently. This is unfortunate, thought he, for I cannot sail till that voice is dumb for ever. My stores and treasures lie, not in yon dungeon, it is true, but in the opposite wing. My slaves, as they move them, must not hear his voice. But what fear of that? In 3 days, if he still survive, his accents, by my father's beard, must be weak enough. Then, no, they could not pierce even through this tomb. By Isis, it is cold. I long for a deep draught of the spice Falernian. With that, the remorseless Egyptian drew his gown closer around him and re-sought the upper air. End of Book 4, Chapter 13. Recording by Ben Wilford of Jackson, Tennessee. Chapter 14 of Last Days of Pompeii. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ben Wilford. Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer-Lytton, Book 4, Chapter 14. Chapter 14. Nadia accosts Calenus. What words of terror, yet of hope, had Nadia overheard? The next day Glaucus was to be condemned, yet there lived one who could save him and adjudge Arbaces to his doom, and that one breathed within a few steps of her hiding place. She caught his cries and shrieks, his imprecations, his prayers, though they fell choked and muffled on her ear. He was imprisoned, but she knew the secret of his cell. Could she but escape, could she but seek the praetor who might yet in time be given to light, and preserve the Athenian. Her emotions almost stifled her. Her brain reeled. She felt her sense give way. But by a violent effort she mastered herself, and after listening intently for several minutes, till she was convinced that Arbaces had left the space to solitude and herself, she crept on as her ear guided her to the very door that had closed upon Calenus. Here she more distinctly caught his accents of terror and despair. Thrice she attempted to speak, and thrice her voice failed to penetrate the folds of the heavy door. At length, finding the lock, she applied her lips to its small aperture, and the prisoner distinctly heard a soft tone breathe his name. His blood curdled, his hair stood on end. That awful solitude! What mysterious and preternatural being could penetrate? "Who's there?" he cried, in new alarm. "What spectre, what dread larva, calls upon the lost Calenus?" "Priest," replied the Thessalian, "unknown to Arbaces, I have been, by the permission of the gods, a witness to this perfidy. If I myself can escape from these walls, I may save thee, but let thy voice reach my ear through this narrow passage, and answer what I ask." "Ah, blessed spirit," said the priest, exultingly, and obeying the suggestion of Nadia, "save me, and I will sell the very cups on the altar to pay thy kindness." "I want not thy gold, I want thy secret. Did I hear aright? Canst thou save the Athenian Glaucus from the charge against his life?" "I can, I can!" "Therefore, may the Furies blast the foul Egyptian. Has Arbaces snared me thus, and left me to starve and rot? They accuse the Athenian of murder. Canst thou disprove the accusation? Only free me, and the proudest head of Pompeii is not more safe than his. I saw the deed done. I saw Arbaces strike the blow. I can convict the true murderer and acquit the innocent man. But if I perish, he dies also. Dost thou interest thyself for him? O blessed stranger, in my heart is the urn which condemns or frees him. And thou wilt give full evidence of what thou knowest? Will? Oh, where hell at my feet, yes. Revenge on the false Egyptian. Revenge, revenge, revenge. As through his ground teeth Calenus shrieked forth these last words, Nadia felt that in his worst passions was her certainty of his justice to the Athenian. Her heart beat. Was it to be her proud destiny to preserve her idolized, her adored? "Enough," said she, The powers that conducted me hither will carry me through all. Yes, I feel that I shall deliver thee. Wait in patience and hope. But be cautious, be prudent, sweet stranger. Attempt not to appeal to Arbaces. He is marble. Seek the praetor. Say what thou knowest. Obtain his writ of search. Bring soldiers, and smiths of cunning. These locks are wondrous strong. Time flies. I may starve, if you are not quick. Go, go. Yet stay. It is horrible to be alone. The air is like a charnel, and the scorpions, ha! And the pale larva. Oh, stay, stay. Nay, says Nadia, terrified by the terror of the priest, and anxious to confer with herself. Nay, for thy sake I must depart. Take hope for thy companion. Farewell. So saying, she glided away, and felt with extended arms along the pillared space until she had gained the farther end of the hall and the mouth of the passage that led to the upper air. But there she paused. She felt that it would be more safe to wait a while, until the night was so far blended with the morning that the whole house would be buried in sleep, and so that she might quit it unobserved. She, therefore, once more laid herself down and counted the weary moments. In her sanguine heart, joy was the predominant emotion. Glaucus was in deadly peril, but she could save him. End of Book 4, Chapter 14. Recording by Ben Wilford of Jackson, Tennessee.
Chapter 15 of Last Days of Pompeii. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Amy Benton. Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Book 4, Chapter 15. Arbaces and Ione. Nydia gains the garden. Will she escape and save the Athenian? When Arbaces had warmed his veins by large draughts of that spiced and perfumed wine so valued by the luxurious, he felt more than usually elated and exultant of heart. There is a pride in triumphant ingenuity, not less felt, perhaps, though its object be guilty. Our vain human nature hugs itself in the consciousness of superior craft and self-obtained success. Afterwards comes the horrible reaction of remorse. But remorse was not a feeling which Arbaces was likely ever to experience for the fate of the base Calenus. He swept from his remembrance the thought of the priest's agonies and lingering death. He felt only that a great danger was past, and a possible foe silenced. All left to him now would be to account to the priesthood for the disappearance of Calenus, and this, he imagined, it would not be difficult to do. Calenus had often been employed by him in various religious missions to the neighboring cities. On some such errand he could now assert that he had been sent with offerings to the shrines of Isis at Herculaneum and Neapolis, placatory of the goddess for the recent murder of her priest Arbaces. When Calenus had expired, his body might be thrown, previous to the Egyptians' departure from Pompeii, into the deep stream of the Sarnus, and when discovered, suspicion would probably fall upon the Nazarene atheists as an act of revenge for the death of Olinthus at the arena. After rapidly running over these plans for screening himself, Arbaces dismissed at once from his mind all recollection of the wretched priest, and, animated by the success which had lately crowned all his schemes, he surrendered his thoughts to Ione. The last time he had seen her, she had driven him from her presence by a reproachful and bitter scorn, which his arrogant nature was unable to endure. Now he felt emboldened once more to renew that interview, for his passion for her was like a similar feeling in other men. It made him restless for her presence, even though in that presence he was exasperated and humbled. From delicacy to her grief he laid not aside his dark and unfestive robes, but renewing the perfumes on his raven locks, and arranging his tunic in its most becoming folds, he sought the chamber of the Neapolitan. Accosting the slave in attendance without, he inquired if Ione had yet retired to rest, and learning that she was still up, and unusually quiet and composed, he ventured into her presence. He found his beautiful ward sitting before a small table, and leaning her face upon both her hands in the attitude of thought. Yet the expression of the face itself possessed not its wonted bright and Psyche-like expression of sweet intelligence. The lips were apart, the eyes vacant and unheeding, and the long dark hair falling neglected and dishevelled upon her neck gave by the contrast additional paleness to a cheek which had already lost the roundness of its contour. Arbaces gazed upon her a moment ere he advanced. She, too, lifted up her eyes, and when she saw who was the intruder, shut them with an expression of pain, but did not stir. "Ah!" said Arbaces, in a low and earnest tone, as he respectfully, nay, humbly advanced, and seated himself at a little distance from the table. "Ah! that my death could remove thy hatred, then would I gladly die. Thou wrongest me, Ione, but I will bear the wrong without a murmur. Only let me see thee sometimes, chide, reproach, scorn me, if thou wilt. I will teach myself to bear it. And is not even thy bitterest tone sweeter to me than the music of the most artful lute? In thy silence the world seems to stand still. A stagnation curdles up the veins of the earth. There is no earth, no life, without the light of thy countenance and the melody of thy voice." "Give me back my brother and my betrothed," said Ione, in a calm and imploring tone, and a few large tears rolled unheeded down her cheeks. "Would that I could restore the one and save the other," returned Arbaces, with apparent emotion. "Yes, to make thee happy I would renounce my ill-fated love, and gladly join thy hand to the Athenians. Perhaps he will yet come unscathed from his trial." Arbaces had prevented her from learning that the trial had already commenced. "If so, thou art free to judge or condemn him thyself. And think not, O Ione, that I would follow thee longer with a prayer of love. I know it is in vain. Suffer me only to weep, to mourn with thee. Forgive a violence deeply repented, and that shall offend no more. Let me be to thee only what I once was, a friend, a father, a protector. Ah, Ione, spare me and forgive." "I forgive thee. Save but Glaucus, and I will renounce him. O mighty Arbaces, thou art powerful in evil or in good. Save the Athenian, and the poor Ione will never see him more." As she spoke, she rose with weak and trembling limbs, and falling at his feet, she clasped his knees. "Oh, if thou really lovest me, if thou art human, remember my father's ashes, remember my childhood, think of all the hours we passed happily together, and save my Glaucus." Strange convulsions shook the frame of the Egyptian. His features worked fearfully. He turned his face aside, and said in a hollow voice, "If I could save him, even now, I would, but the Roman law is stern and sharp. Yet if I could succeed, if I could rescue and set him free, wouldst thou be mine, my bride?" "Thine?" repeated Ione, rising. "Thine? Thy bride? My brother's blood is unavenged. Who slew him? O nemesis, can I even sell for the life of Glaucus thy solemn trust? Arbaces, thine? Never!" "Ione, Ione!" cried Arbaces passionately. "Why these mysterious words? Why dost thou couple my name with the thought of thy brother's death?" "My dreams couple it, and dreams are from the gods." "Vain fantasies all! It is for a dream that thou wouldst wrong the innocent, and hazard thy sole chance of saving thy lover's life." "Hear me," said Ione, speaking firmly, and with a deliberate and solemn voice. "If Glaucus be saved by thee, I will never be borne to his home a bride. But I cannot master the horror of other rites. I cannot wed with thee. Interrupt me not. But mark me, Arbaces, if Glaucus die, on that same day I baffle thine arts, and leave to thy love only my dust. Yes, thou mayst put the knife and the poison from my reach, thou mayst imprison, thou mayst chain me, but the brave soul resolved to escape is never without means. These hands, naked and unarmed though they be, shall tear away the bonds of life. Fetter them, and these lips shall firmly refuse the air. Thou art learned. Thou hast read how women have died rather than meet dishonor. If Glaucus perish, I will not unworthily linger behind him. By all the gods of the heaven and the ocean and the earth, I devote myself to death. I have said." High, proud, dilating in her stature like one inspired, the air and the voice of Ione struck an awe into the breast of a listener. "Brave heart," said he, after a short pause, "thou art indeed worthy to be mine. Oh, that I should have dreamt of such a partner in my lofty destinies, and never found it but in thee! Ione," he continued rapidly, Dost thou not see that we were born for each other? Canst thou not recognize something kindred to thine own energy, thine own courage in this high and self-dependent soul? We were formed to unite our sympathies, formed to breathe a new spirit into this hackneyed and gross world, formed for the mighty ends which my soul, sweeping down the gloom of time, foresees with a prophet's vision. With a resolution equal to thine own, I defy thy threats of an inglorious suicide. I hail thee as my own, queen of climes undarkened by the eagle's wing, unravaged by his beak. I bow before thee in homage and in awe, and I claim thee in worship and in love. Together we will cross the ocean, together we will found our realm, and far distant ages shall acknowledge the long race of kings born from the marriage bed of Arbaces and Ione. Thou ravest. These mystic declamations are suited rather to some palsied crone selling charms in the marketplace than to the wise Arbaces. Thou hast heard my resolution. It is fixed as the fates themselves. Orcus has heard my vow, and it is written in the book of the unforgetful Hades. Atone then, O Arbaces, atone the past. Convert hatred into regard, vengeance into gratitude. Preserve one who shall never be thy rival. These are the acts suited to thy original nature, which gives forth sparks of something high and noble. They weigh in the scales of the kings of death. They turn the balance on that day when the disembodied soul stands shivering and dismayed between Tartarus and Elysium. They gladden the heart in life, better and longer than the reward of a momentary passion. O Arbaces, hear me and be swayed. Enough, Ione. All that I can do for Glaucus shall be done, but blame me not if I fail. Inquire of my foes even, if I have not sought, if I do not seek, to turn aside the sentence from his head, and judge me accordingly. Sleep then, Ione. Night wanes. I leave thee to rest, and mayst thou have kinder dreams of one who has no existence but in thine. Without waiting for a reply, Arbaces hastily withdrew, afraid perhaps to trust himself farther to the passionate prayer of Ione, which racked him with jealousy, even while it touched him to compassion. But compassion itself had come too late. Had Ione even pledged him her hand as a reward, he could not now, his evidence given, the populace excited, have saved the Athenian. Still made sanguine by the very energy of mind, he threw himself on the chances of the future, and believed he could yet triumph over the woman who had so entangled his passions. As his attendants assisted to unrobe him for the night, the thought of Nydia flashed across him. He felt it was necessary that Ione should never learn of her lover's frenzy, lest it might excuse his imputed crime, and it was possible that her attendants might inform her that Nydia was under his roof, and that she might desire to see her. As this idea crossed him, he turned to one of his freedmen. "Go, Callias," said he, "forthwith to Sozia, and tell him that on no pretence is he to suffer the blind slave Nydia out of her chamber. But stay, first seek those in attendance upon my ward, and caution them not to inform her that the blind girl is under my roof. Go, quick." The freedman hastened to obey. After having discharged his commission with respect to Ione's attendants, he sought the worthy Sozia. He found him not in the little cell which was apportioned for his cubiculum, but he called his name aloud, and from Nydia's chamber, close at hand, he heard the voice of Sozia reply, "O Callias, is it you that I hear? The gods be praised! Open the door, I pray you." Callias withdrew the bolt, and the rueful face of Sozia hastily protruded itself. "What, in the chamber with that young girl, Sozia? Pro pudor, are there not fruits ripe enough on the wall, that thou must tamper with such green?" "Name not that little witch," interrupted Sozia impatiently. "She will be my ruin." And he forthwith imparted to Callias the history of the air-demon and the escape of the Thessalian. "Hang thyself then, unhappy Sozia. I am just charged from Arbaces with a message on thee. On no account art thou to suffer her, even for a moment, from that chamber." "Me miserum!" exclaimed the slave. "What can I do? By this time she may have visited half Pompeii, but tomorrow I will undertake to catch her in her old haunts. Keep but thy counsel, my dear Callias." "I will do all that friendship can, consistent with my own safety. But are you sure that she has left the house? She may be hiding here yet." "How is that possible? She could easily have gained the garden, and the door, as I told thee, was open." "Nay, not so, for at that very hour thou specifiest, Arbaces was in the garden, with the priest Calenus. I went there in search of some herbs for my master's bath tomorrow. I saw the table set out, but the gate, I am sure, was shut. Depend upon it, that Calenus entered by the garden, and naturally closed the door after him. But it was not locked? Yes, for I myself, angry at a negligence which might expose the bronzes and the peristyle to the mercy of any robber, turned the key, took it away, and, as I did not see the proper slave to whom to give it, or I should have rated him finely, here it actually is, still in my girdle. O merciful Bacchus! I did not pray to thee in vain after all. Let us not lose a moment. Let us to the garden instantly. She may yet be there. The good-natured Callias consented to assist the slave, and after vainly searching the chambers at hand and the recesses of the peristyle, they entered the garden. It was about this time that Nydia had resolved to quit her hiding-place and venture forth on her way. Lightly, tremulously, holding her breath, which ever and anon broke forth in quick convulsive gasps, now gliding by the flower wreathed columns that bordered the peristyle, now darkening the still moonshine that fell over its tessellated centre, now ascending the terrace of the garden, now gliding amidst the gloomy and breathless trees, she gained the fatal door, to find it locked. We have all seen that expression of pain, of uncertainty, of fear, which of sudden disappointment of touch, if I may use the expression, casts over the face of the blind. But what words can paint the intolerable woe, the sinking of the whole heart, which was now visible in the features of the Thessalian? Again and again her small quivering hands wandered to and fro the inexorable door. Poor thing that thou wert! In vain had been all thy noble courage, thy innocent craft, thy doublings to escape the hound and the huntsman. Within but a few yards from thee, laughing at thy endeavours, thy despair, knowing thou wert now their own, and watching with cruel patience their own moment to seize their prey, thou art saved from seeing thy pursuers. Hush, Callias, let her go on. Let us see what she will do when she has convinced herself that the door is honest. Look, she raises her face to the heavens, she mutters, she sinks down despondent. No, by Pollux, she has some new scheme. She will not resign herself, by Jupiter, a tough spirit. See, she springs up, she retraces her steps, she thinks of some other chance. I advise thee, Sosia, to delay no longer. Seize her ere she quit the garden now. Ah, run away! I have thee, eh? said Sosia, seizing upon the unhappy Nydia. As a hare's last human cry in the fangs of the dog, as the sharp voice of terror, uttered by a sleep-walker suddenly awakened, broke the shriek of the blind girl when she felt the abrupt grip of her gaoler. It was a shriek of such utter agony, such entire despair, that it might have rung hauntingly in your ears for ever. She felt as if the last plank of the sinking Glaucus were torn from his clasp. It had been a suspense of life and death had now won the game. Gods! That cry will alarm the house. Arbaces sleeps full lightly. Gag her! cried Callias. Ah, here's a very napkin which the young witch conjured away from my reason. Come, that's right. Now thou art dumb as well as blind. And catching the light weight in his arms, Sosia soon gained the house, and reached the chamber from which Nydia had escaped. There, removing the gag, he left her to a solitude so racked and terrible that out of Hades its anguish could scarcely be exceeded. End of Book 4, Chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Last Days of Pompeii. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Amy Benton. Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Book 4, Chapter 16. The sorrow of boon companions for our afflictions, the dungeon and its victims. It was now late on the third and last day of the trial of Glaucus and Olinthus. A few hours after the court had broken up and judgment been given, a small party of the fashionable youth at Pompeii were assembled round the fastidious board of Lepidus. "So Glaucus denies his crime to the last?" said Clodius. "Yes, but the testimony of Arbaces was convincing. He saw the blow given," answered Lepidus. "What could have been the cause?" "Why, the priest was a gloomy and sullen fellow. He probably rated Glaucus soundly about his gay life and gaming habits, and ultimately swore he would not consent to his marriage with Ione. High words arose. Glaucus seems to have been full of the passionate god, and struck in sudden exasperation. The excitement of wine, the desperation of abrupt remorse, brought on the delirium under which he suffered for some days, and I can readily imagine, poor fellow, that yet confused by that delirium, he is even now unconscious of the crime he committed. Such at least is the shrewd conjecture of Arbaces, who seems to have been most kind and forbearing in his testimony. Yes, he has made himself generally popular by it, but in consideration of these extenuating circumstances, the Senate should have relaxed the sentence. And they would have done so but for the people, but they were outrageous. The priest had spared no pains to excite them, and they imagined, the ferocious brutes, because Glaucus was a rich man and a gentleman, that he was likely to escape, and therefore they were inveterate against him, and doubly resolved upon his sentence. It seems by some accident or other that he was never formally enrolled as a Roman citizen, and thus the Senate is deprived of the power to resist the people, though after all there was but a majority of 3 against him. Ho, the Chian! He looks sadly altered, but how composed and fearless! Hey, we shall see if his firmness will last over tomorrow. But what merit in courage, when that aesthetical hound Olinthus manifested the same? The blasphemer! Yes, said Lepidus, with pious wrath. No wonder that one of the Decurions was, but 2 days ago, struck dead by lightning in a serene sky. The gods feel vengeance against Pompeii, while the vile desecrator is alive within its walls. Yet so lenient was the Senate, that had he but expressed his penitence, and scattered a few grains of incense on the altar of Cybele, he would have been let off. I doubt whether these Nazarenes, had they the state religion, would be as tolerant to us, supposing we had kicked down the image of their deity, blasphemed their rites, and denied their faith. They give Glaucus one chance in consideration of the circumstances. They allow him against the lion the use of the same stylus wherewith he smote the priest. Hast thou seen the lion? Hast thou looked at his teeth and fangs, and wilt thou call that a chance? Why, sword and buckler would be mere reed and papyrus against the rush of the mighty beast. No, I think the true mercy has been not to leave him long in suspense, and it was therefore fortunate for him that our benign laws are slow to pronounce but swift to execute, and that the games of the amphitheatre had been, by a sort of providence, so long since fixed for tomorrow. He who awaits death dies twice. As for the atheist, said Clodius, he is to cope the grim tiger naked-handed. Well, these combats are past betting on. Who will take the odds? A peal of laughter announced the ridicule of the question. Poor Clodius, said the host. Ay, to lose a friend is something, but to find no one to bet on the chance of his escape is a worse misfortune to thee. Why, it is provoking. It would have been some consolation to him and to me to think he was useful to the last. The people, said the grave Pansa, are all delighted with the result. They were so much afraid the sports of the amphitheatre would go off without a criminal for the beasts. And now to get 2 such criminals is indeed a joy for the poor fellows. They work hard. They ought to have some amusement. There speaks the popular Pansa, who never moves without a string of clients as long as an Indian triumph. He is always prating about the people. Gods! He will end by being a Gracchus. Certainly I am no insolent patrician, said Pansa with a generous air. Well, observed Lepidus, it would have been assuredly dangerous to have been merciful on the eve of a beast fight. If ever I, though a Roman bred and born, come to be tried, pray Jupiter there may be either no beasts in the vivaria or plenty of criminals in the gaol. And pray, said one of the party, what has become of that poor girl whom Glaucus was to have married? A widow without being a bride? That is hard. Oh, returned Clodius, she is safe under the protection of her guardian Arbaces. It was natural she should go to him when she had lost both lover and brother. By sweet Venus, Glaucus was fortunate among the women. They say the rich Julia was in love with him. A mere fable, my friend, said Clodius coxcomically. I was with her to-day. If any feeling of the sort she ever conceived, I flatter myself that I have consoled her. Hush, gentlemen, said Pansa. Do you not know that Clodius is employed at the house of Diomed in blowing hard at the torch? It begins to burn, and will soon shine bright on the shrine of Hymen. Is it so? Said Lepidus. What? Clodius become a married man? Fie! Never fear, answered Clodius. Old Diomed is delighted at the notion of marrying his daughter to a nobleman, and will come down largely with the sesterces. You will see that I shall not lock them up in the atrium. It will be a white day for his jolly friends when Clodius marries an heiress." "Say you so?" cried Lepidus. "Come, then, a full cup to the health of the fair Julia." While such was the conversation, one not discordant to the tone of mind common among the dissipated of that day, and which might perhaps a century ago have found an echo in the looser circles of Paris, while such, I say, was the conversation in the gaudy triclinium of Lepidus, far different the scene which scowled before the young Athenian. After his condemnation, Glaucus was admitted no more to the gentle guardianship of Sallust, the only friend of his distress. He was led along the forum till the guards stopped at a small door by the side of the temple of Jupiter. You may see the place still. The door opened in the centre, in a somewhat singular fashion, revolving round on its hinges, as it were, like a modern turnstile, so as only to leave half the threshold open at the same time. Through this narrow aperture they thrust the prisoner, placed before him a loaf and a pitcher of water, and left him to darkness, and, as he thought, to solitude. So suddenly had been that revolution of fortune which had prostrated him from the palmy height of youthful pleasure and successful love to the lowest abyss of ignominy and the horror of the most bloody death, that he could scarcely convince himself that he was not held in the meshes of some fearful dream. His elastic and glorious frame had triumphed over a potion, the greater part of which he had fortunately not drained. He had recovered sense and consciousness, but still a dim and misty depression clung to his nerves and darkened his mind. His natural courage and the Greek nobility of pride enabled him to vanquish all unbecoming apprehension, and, in the judgment court, to face his awful lot with a steady mien and unquailing eye. But the consciousness of innocence scarcely sufficed to support him when the gaze of men no longer excited his haughty valour, and he was left to loneliness and silence. He felt the damps of the dungeon sink chillingly into his enfeebled frame. He, the fastidious, the luxurious, the refined, he who had hitherto braved no hardship and known no sorrow, beautiful bird that he was! Why had he left his far and sunny clime, the olive groves of his native hills, the music of immemorial streams? Why had he wantoned on his glittering plumage amidst these harsh and ungenial strangers, dazzling the eyes with his gorgeous hues, charming the ear with his blithesome song, thus suddenly to be arrested, caged in darkness, a victim and a prey, his gay flights for ever over, his hymns of gladness for ever stilled, the poor Athenian? His very faults the exuberance of a gentle and joyous nature, how little had his past career fitted him for the trials he was destined to undergo! The hoots of the mob, amidst whose plaudits he had so often guided his graceful car and bounding steeds, still rang gratingly in his ear. The cold and stony faces of former friends, the co-mates of merry revels, still rose before his eye. None now were by to soothe, to sustain the admired, the adulated stranger. These walls opened but on the dread arena of a violent and shameful death. And Ione, of her too he had heard naught, no encouraging word, no pitying message. She too had forsaken him, she believed him guilty. And of what crime? The murder of a brother. He ground his teeth, he groaned aloud, and ever anon a sharp fear shot across him. In that fell and fierce delirium which had so unaccountably seized his soul, which had so ravaged the disordered brain, might he not, indeed, unknowing to himself, have committed the crime of which he was accused? Yet as the thought flashed upon him, it was as suddenly checked, for amidst all the darkness of the past he thought distinctly to recall the dim grove of Cybele, the upward face of the pale dead, the pause that he had made beside the corpse, and the sudden shock that felled him to the earth. He felt convinced of his innocence, and yet who, to the latest time, long after his mangled remains were mingled with the elements, would believe him guiltless or uphold his fame? As he recalled his interview with Arbaces, and the causes of revenge which had been excited in the heart of that dark and fearful man, he could not but believe that he was the victim of some deep-laid and mysterious snare, the clue and train of which was lost in attempting to discover. And Ione, Arbaces loved her. Might his rival's success be founded upon his ruin? That thought cut him more deeply than all, and his noble heart was more stung by jealousy than appalled by fear. Again he groaned aloud. A voice from the recess of the darkness answered that burst of anguish. "Who," it said, "is my companion in this awful hour? Athenian Glaucus, is it thou?" "So indeed they called me in mine hour of fortune. They may have other names for me now. And thy name, stranger?" "Is Olinthus, thy co-mate in the prison as the trial." "What! he whom they call the atheist? Is it the injustice of men that has taught thee to deny the providence of the gods?" "Alas!" answered Olinthus, "thou, not I, art the true atheist, for thou deniest the sole true God, the unknown one, to whom thy Athenian fathers erected an altar. It is in this hour that I know my God. He is with me in the dungeon. His smile penetrates the darkness. On the eve of death my heart whispers immortality, and earth recedes from me but to bring the weary soul nearer unto heaven." "Tell me," said Glaucus abruptly, "did I not hear thy name coupled with that of Arbaces in my trial? Dost thou believe me guilty?" "God alone reads the heart, but my suspicion rested not upon thee." "On whom, then?" "Thy accuser, Arbaces." "Ha! thou cheerest me. And wherefore?" "Because I know the man's evil breast, and he had cause to fear him who is now dead." With that Olinthus proceeded to inform Glaucus of those details which the reader already knows: the conversion of Arbaces, the plan they had proposed for the detection of the impostures of the Egyptian upon the youthful weaknesses of the proselyte. "Therefore," concluded Olinthus, "had the deceased encountered Arbaces, reviled his treasons, and threatened detection, the place, the hour, might have favored the wrath of the Egyptian, and passion and craft alike dictated the fatal blow." "It must have been so," cried Glaucus joyfully. "I am happy. Yet what, O unfortunate, avails to thee now the discovery? Thou art condemned and fated, and in thine innocence thou wilt perish." "But I shall know myself guiltless, and in my mysterious madness I had fearful though momentary doubts. Yet tell me, man of strange creed, thinkest thou that for small errors, or for ancestral faults, we are forever abandoned and accursed by the powers above, whatever name thou allottest to them? God is just, and abandons not his creatures for their mere human frailty. God is merciful, and curses none but the wicked who repent not. Yet it seemeth to me as if, in the divine anger, I had been smitten by a sudden madness, a supernatural and solemn frenzy, wrought not by human means." "There are demons on earth," answered the Nazarene fearfully, "as well as there are God and his Son in heaven, and since thou acknowledgest not the last, the first may have had power over thee." Glaucus did not reply, and there was a silence for some minutes. At length the Athenian said, in a changed and soft and half hesitating voice, "Christian, believest thou, among the doctrines of thy creed, that the dead live again, that they who have loved here are united hereafter, that beyond the grave our good name shines purer from the mortal mists that unjustly dim it in this gross-eyed world, and that the streams which are divided by the desert and the rock meet in the solemn Hades, and flow once more into one?" "Believe I that? O Athenian, no, I do not believe. I know, and it is that beautiful and blessed assurance which supports me now. O Silene," continued Olinthus passionately, "bride of my heart, torn from me in the first month of our nuptials, shall I not see thee yet, and ere many days be past? Welcome, welcome, death, that will bring me to heaven and thee." There was something in this sudden burst of human affection which struck a kindred chord in the soul of the Greek. He felt for the first time a sympathy greater than mere affliction between him and his companion. He crept nearer towards Olinthus, for the Italians, fierce in some points, were not unnecessarily cruel in others. They spared the separate cell and the superfluous chain, and allowed the victims of the arena the sad comfort of such freedom and such companionship as the prison would afford. "Yes," continued the Christian with holy fervour, "the immortality of the soul, the resurrection, the reunion of the dead, is the great principle of our creed, the great truth a God suffered death itself to attest and proclaim. No fabled Elysium, no poetic Orcus, but a pure and radiant heritage of heaven itself is the portion of the good." "Tell me, then, thy doctrines, and expound to me thy hopes," said Glaucus earnestly. Olinthus was not slow to obey that prayer, and there, as oftentimes in the early ages of the Christian creed, it was in the darkness of the dungeon, and over the approach of death, that the dawning gospel shed its soft and consecrating rays. End of Book 4. Chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of Last Days of Pompeii. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer-Lytton. Book 4, Chapter 17. A Chance for Glaucus. The hours passed in lingering torture over the head of Nydia from the time in which she had been replaced in her cell. Sosia, as if afraid he should be again outwitted, had refrained from visiting her until late in the morning of the following day, and then he but thrust in the periodical basket of food and wine and hastily reclosed the door. That day rolled on, and Nydia felt herself pent, barred, inexorably confined, when that day was the judgment day of Glaucus, and when her release would have saved him. Yet knowing, almost impossible as seemed her escape, that the sole chance for the life of Glaucus rested on her, this young girl, frail, passionate, and acutely susceptible as she was, resolved not to give way to a despair that would disable her from seizing whatever opportunity might occur. She kept her senses whenever, beneath the whirl of intolerable thought, they reeled and tottered. Nay, she took food and wine that she might sustain her strength, that she might be prepared. She revolved scheme after scheme of escape, and was forced to dismiss all. Yet Sosia was her only hope, the only instrument with which she could tamper. He had been superstitious in the desire of ascertaining whether he could eventually purchase his freedom. Blessed gods! Might he not be won by the bribe of freedom itself? Was she not nearly rich enough to purchase it? Her slender arms were covered with bracelets, the presents of Ione, and on her neck she yet wore that very chain which, it may be remembered, had occasioned her jealous quarrel with Glaucus, and which she had afterwards promised vainly to wear forever. She waited burningly till Sosia should again appear, but as hour after hour passed and he came not, she grew impatient. Every nerve beat with fever. She could endure the solitude no longer. She groaned, she shrieked aloud, she beat herself against the door. Her cries echoed along the hall, and Sosia, in peevish anger, hastened to see what was the matter, and silence his prisoner, if possible. "Ho, ho, what is this?" said he, surlily. "Young slave, if thou screamest out thus, we must gag thee again. My shoulders will smart for it, if thou art heard by my master." "Kind Sosia, chide me not. I cannot endure to be so long alone," answered Nydia. "The solitude appalls me. Sit with me, I pray, a little while. Nay, fear not that I should attempt to escape. Place thy seat before the door. Keep thine eye on me. I will not stir from this spot." Sosia, who was a considerable gossip himself, was moved by this address. He pitied one who had nobody to talk with. It was his case, too. He pitied, and resolved to relieve himself. He took the hint of Nydia, placed a stool before the door, leaned his back against it, and replied: "I am sure I do not wish to be churlish, and so far as a little innocent chat goes, I have no objection to indulge you. But mind, no tricks, no more conjuring." "No, no. Tell me, dear Sosia, what is the hour?" "It is already evening. The goats are going home." "Oh, gods! How went the trial?" "Both condemned." Nydia repressed the shriek. "Well, well, I thought it would be so. When do they suffer?" "Tomorrow, in the amphitheatre. If it were not for thee, little wretch, I should be allowed to go with the rest and see it." Nydia leaned back for some moments. Nature could endure no more. She had fainted away. But Sosia did not perceive it, for it was dusk of eve, and he was full of his own privations. He went on lamenting the loss of so delightful a show, and accusing the injustice of Arbaces for singling him out from all his fellows to be converted into a jailer; and ere he had half finished, Nydia, with a deep sigh, recovered the sense of life. "Thou sighest, blind one, at my loss. Well, that is some comfort. So long as you acknowledge how much you cost me, I will endeavor not to grumble. It is hard to be ill-treated and yet not pitied. Sosia, how much dost thou require to make up the purchase of thy freedom? How much? Why, about 2,000 sesterces. The gods be praised! Not more? Seest thou these bracelets and this chain? They are well worth double that sum. I will give them thee if— Tempt me not, I cannot release thee. Arbaces is a severe and awful master. Who knows but I might feed the fishes of the Sarnus Alice? All the sesterces in the world would not buy me back into life. Better a live dog than a dead lion. Sosia, thy freedom! Think well. If thou wilt let me out only for one little hour, let me out at midnight, I will return ere tomorrow's dawn. Nay, thou canst go with me. No, said Sosia sturdily. A slave once disobeyed Arbaces, and he was never more heard of. But the law gives a master no power over the life of a slave. The law is very obliging, but more polite than efficient. I know that Arbaces always gets the law on his side. Besides, if I am once dead, what law can bring me to life again? Nydia wrung her hands. Is there no hope, then? Said she, convulsively. None of escape till Arbaces gives the word. Well, then, said Nydia quickly, thou wilt not at least refuse to take a letter for me. Thy master cannot kill thee for that. To whom? The praetor. To a magistrate? No, not I. I should be made a witness in court, for what I know, and the way they cross-examine the slaves is by torture. Pardon, I meant not the praetor. It was a word that escaped me unawares. I meant quite another person, the gay Sallust. Oh, and what want you with him? Glaucus was my master. He purchased me from a cruel lord. He alone has been kind to me. He is to die. I shall never live happily if I cannot, in his hour of trial and doom, let him know that one heart is grateful to him. Sallust is his friend. He will convey my message. I am sure he will do no such thing. Glaucus will have enough to think of between this and tomorrow without troubling his head about a blind girl. Man, said Nydia, rising, wilt thou become free? Thou hast the offer in thy power. Tomorrow it will be too late. Never was freedom more cheaply purchased. Thou canst easily and unmissed leave home. Less than half an hour will suffice for thine absence. And for such a trifle wilt thou refuse liberty? Sosia was greatly moved. It was true that the request was remarkably silly, but what was that to him? So much the better. He could lock the door on Nydia, and, if Arbaces should learn his absence, the offence was venial, and would merit but a reprimand. Yet, should Nydia's letter contain something more than what she had said, should it speak of her imprisonment, as he shrewdly conjectured it would do, what then? It need never be known to Arbaces that he had carried the letter. At the worst, the bribe was enormous, the risk light, the temptation irresistible. He hesitated no longer, he assented to the proposal. Give me the trinkets, and I will take the letter. Yet stay, thou art a slave, thou hast no right to these ornaments, they are thy master's. They were the gifts of Glaucus, he is my master. What chance hath he to claim them? Who else will know they are in my possession? Enough, I will bring thee the papyrus. No, not papyrus, a tablet of wax and a stylus. Nydia, as the reader will have seen, was born of gentle parents. They had done all to lighten her calamity, and her quick intellect seconded their exertions. Despite her blindness, she had therefore acquired in childhood, though imperfectly, the art to write with a sharp stylus upon waxen tablets, in which her exquisite sense of touch came to her aid. When the tablets were brought to her, she thus painfully traced some words in Greek, the language of her childhood, and which almost every Italian of the higher ranks was then supposed to know. She carefully wound round the epistle the thread, and covered its knot with wax, and ere she placed it in the hands of Sosia, she thus addressed him. Sosia, I am blind and in prison. Thou mayest think to deceive me, thou mayest pretend only to take the letter to Sallust, thou mayest not fulfill thy charge. But here I solemnly dedicate thy head to vengeance, thy soul to the infernal powers, if thou wrongest thy trust. And I call upon thee to place thy right hand of faith in mine, and repeat after me these words: By the ground on which we stand, by the elements which contain life and can curse life, by Orcus the all-avenging, by the Olympian Jupiter the all-seeing, I swear that I will honestly discharge my trust, and faithfully deliver into the hands of Sallust this letter. And if I perjure myself in this oath, may the full curses of heaven and hell be wreaked upon me. Enough. I trust thee. Take thy reward. It is already dark. Depart at once. Thou art a strange girl, and thou hast frightened me terribly. But it is all very natural, and if Sallust is to be found, I give him this letter as I have sworn. By my faith I may have my little peccadilloes, but perjury, no. I leave that to my betters. With this Sosia withdrew, carefully passing the heavy bolt athwart Nydia's door, carefully locking its wards; and, hanging the key to his girdle, he retired to his own den, enveloped himself from head to foot in a huge disguising cloak, and slipped out by the back way undisturbed and unseen. The streets were thin and empty. He soon gained the house of Sallust. The porter bade him leave his letter, and be gone, for Sallust was so grieved at the condemnation of Glaucus that he could not on any account be disturbed. Nevertheless, I have sworn to give this letter into his own hands. Do so I must. And Sosia, well knowing by experience that Cerberus loves a sop, thrust some half a dozen sesterces into the hand of the porter. Well, well, said the latter, relenting, you may enter if you will, but, to tell you the truth, Sallust is drinking himself out of his grief. It is his way when anything disturbs him. He orders a capital supper, the best wine, and does not give over till everything is out of his head but the liquor. An excellent plan, excellent. Ah, what it is to be rich! If I were Sallust, I would have some grief or another every day. But just say a kind word for me with the Atriensis, I see him coming. Sallust was too sad to receive company. He was too sad also to drink alone, so, as was his wont, he admitted his favourite freedman to his entertainment, and a stranger banquet never was held. For, ever and anon, the kind-hearted epicure sighed, whimpered, wept outright, and then turned with double zest to some new dish or his refilled goblet. My good fellow, said he to his companion, it was a most awful judgment. Heigh-ho! It is not bad, that kid, eh? Poor dear Glaucus! What a jaw the lion has, too! Ah, ah, ah! And Sallust sobbed loudly. The fit was stopped by a counteraction of hiccups. Take a cup of wine, said the freedman. A thought too cold. But then how cold Glaucus must be! Shut up the house tomorrow. Not a slave shall stir forth. None of my people shall honour that cursed arena. No, no. Taste the Falernian. Your grief distracts you. By the gods it does. A piece of that cheesecake. It was at this auspicious moment that Sosia was admitted to the presence of the disconsolate carouser. Ho, what art thou? Merely a messenger to Sallust. I give him this billet from a young female. There is no answer that I know of. May I withdraw? Thus said the discreet Sosia, keeping his face muffled in his cloak, and speaking with a feigned voice, so that he might not hereafter be recognized. By the gods, a pimp! Unfeeling wretch! Do you not see my sorrows? Go, and the curses of Pandarus with you. Sosia lost not a moment in retiring. Will you read the letter, Sallust? Said the freedman. Letter? Which letter? Said the epicure, reeling, for he began to see double. A curse on these wenches, say I. Am I a man to think of pleasure when my friend is going to be eat up? Eat another tartlet. No, no, my grief chokes me. Take him to bed, said the freedman, and, Sallust's head now declining fairly on his breast, they bore him off to his cubiculum, still muttering lamentations for Glaucus and imprecations on the unfeeling overtures of ladies of pleasure. Meanwhile Sosia strode indignantly homeward. "Pimp, indeed!" quoth he to himself. "Pimp! A scurvy-tongued fellow, that Sallust. Had I been called knave or thief, I could have forgiven it. But pimp! Faugh! There is something in the word which the toughest stomach in the world would rise against. A knave is a knave for his own pleasure, and a thief for his own profit. And there is something honourable and philosophical in being a rascal for one's own sake. That is doing things upon principle, upon a grand scale. But a pimp is a thing that defiles itself for another. A pipkin that is put on the fire for another man's pottage. A napkin that every guest wipes his hands upon. And the scullion says, by your leave, too. A pimp! I would rather he had called me parricide. But the man was drunk and did not know what he said, and, besides, I disguised myself. Had he seen it had been Sosia who addressed him, it would have been honest Sosia and worthy man, I warrant. Nevertheless, the trinkets have been won easily, that's some comfort. And, O goddess Feronia, I shall be a freedman soon, and then I should like to see who'll call me pimp. Unless, indeed, he pay me pretty handsomely for it." While Sosia was soliloquizing in this high-minded and generous vein, his path lay along a narrow lane that led towards the amphitheatre and its adjacent palaces. Suddenly, as he turned a sharp corner, he found himself in the midst of a considerable crowd. Men, women, and children, all were hurrying or laughing, talking, gesticulating; and, ere he was aware of it, the worthy Sosia was borne away with the noisy stream. "What now?" he asked of his nearest neighbour, a young artificer. "What now? Where are all these good folks thronging? Does any rich patron give away alms or viands to-night?" "Not so, man, better still," replied the artificer. "The noble Panza, the people's friend, has granted the public leave to see the beasts in their vivaria. By Hercules, they will not be seen so safely by some persons to-morrow." "'Tis a pretty sight," said the slave, yielding to the throng that impelled him onward. "And since I may not go to the sports to-morrow, I may as well take a peep at the beasts to-night." "You will do well," returned his new acquaintance. "A lion and a tiger are not to be seen at Pompeii every day." The crowd had now entered a broken and wide space of ground, on which, as it was only lighted scantily and from a distance, the press became dangerous to those whose limbs and shoulders were not fitted for a mob. Nevertheless, the women especially, many of them with children in their arms, or even at the breast, were the most resolute in forcing their way, and their shrill exclamations of complaint or objurgation were heard loud above the more jovial and masculine voices. Yet, amidst them, was a young and girlish voice that appeared to come from one too happy in her excitement to be alive to the inconvenience of the crowd. "Aha!" cried the young woman to some of her companions. "I always told you so. I always said we should have a man for the lion, and now we have one for the tiger, too. I wish to-morrow were come. Ho, ho, for the merry, merry show, with a forest of faces in every row. Lo, the swordsmen, bold as the son of Alcmena, sweep, side by side, o'er the hushed arena. Talk while you may, you will hold your breath, when they meet in the grasp of the glowing death. Tramp, tramp, how gaily they go! Ho, ho, for the merry, merry show!" "A jolly girl," said Sosia. "Yes," replied the young artificer, a curly-headed, handsome youth. "Yes," replied he enviously, "the women love a gladiator. If I had been a slave, I would have soon found my schoolmaster in the lanista." "Would you, indeed?" said Sosia, with a sneer. "People's notions differ." The crowd had now arrived at the place of destination; but as the cell in which the wild beasts were confined was extremely small and narrow, tenfold more vehement than it hitherto had been was the rush of the aspirants to obtain admittance. Two of the officers of the amphitheatre, placed at the entrance, very wisely mitigated the evil by dispensing to the foremost only a limited number of tickets at a time, and admitting no new visitors till their predecessors had sated their curiosity. Sosia, who was a tolerably stout fellow, and not troubled with any remarkable scruples of diffidence or good breeding, contrived to be among the first of the initiated. Separated from his companion the artificer, Sosia found himself in a narrow cell of oppressive heat and atmosphere, and lighted by several rank and flaring torches. The animals, usually kept in different vivaria, or dens, were now, for the greater entertainment of the visitors, placed in one, but equally indeed divided from each other by strong cages protected by iron bars. There they were, the fell and grim wanderers of the desert, who have now become almost the principal agents of this story. The lion, who, as being the more gentle by nature than his fellow beast, had been more incited to ferocity by hunger, stalked restlessly and fiercely to and fro his narrow confines. His eyes were lurid with rage and famine; and as, every now and then, he paused and glared round, the spectators fearfully pressed backward, and drew their breath more quickly. But the tiger lay quiet and extended at full length in his cage, and only by an occasional play of his tail, or a long, impatient yawn, testified any emotion at his confinement, or at the crowd which honored him with their presence. "I have seen no fiercer beast than yon lion even in the amphitheatre of Rome," said a gigantic and sinewy fellow, who stood at the right hand of Sosia. "I feel humbled when I look at his limbs," replied, at the left of Sosia, a slighter and younger figure, with his arms folded on his breast. The slave looked first at one and then at the other. "Virtus in medio, virtue is ever in the middle," muttered he to himself. "A goodly neighbourhood for thee, Sosia, a gladiator on each side." "That is well said, Leyden," returned the huger gladiator. "I feel the same." "And to think," observed Leyden, in a tone of deep feeling, "to think that the noble Greek, he whom we saw but a day or two since before us, so full of youth and health and joyousness, is to feast yon monster." "Why not?" growled Niger, savagely. "Many an honest gladiator has been compelled to a like combat by the Emperor. Why not a wealthy murderer by the law?" Leyden sighed, shrugged his shoulders, and remained silent. Meanwhile the common gazers listened with staring eyes and lips apart. The gladiators were objects of interest as well as the beasts. They were animals of the same species. So the crowd glanced from one to the other, the men and the brutes, whispering their comments, and anticipating the morrow. "Well," said Leyden, turning away, "I thank the gods it is not the lion or the tiger I am to contend with. Even you, Niger, are a gentler combatant than they." "But equally dangerous," said the gladiator, with a fierce laugh; and the bystanders, admiring his vast limbs and ferocious countenance, laughed too. "That as it may be," answered Leyden carelessly, as he pressed through the throng and quitted the den. "I may as well take advantage of his shoulders," thought the prudent Sosia, hastening to follow him. "The crowd always give way to a gladiator, so I will keep close behind, and come in for a share of his consequence." The son of Medon strove quickly through the mob, many of whom recognized his features and profession. "That is young Leyden, a brave fellow. He fights tomorrow," said one. "Ah, I have a bet on him," said another. "See how firmly he walks." "Good luck to thee, Leyden," said a third. "Leyden, you have my wishes," half whispered a fourth, smiling, a comely woman of the middle class. "And if you win, why, you may hear more of me." "A handsome man, by Venus!" cried a fifth, who was a girl scarce in her teens. "Thank you," returned Sosia, gravely taking the compliment to himself. However strong the purer motives of Leyden, and certain though it be that he would never have entered so bloody a calling but from the hope of obtaining his father's freedom, he was not altogether unmoved by the notice he excited. He forgot that the voices now raised in commendation might, on the morrow, shout over his death pangs. By nature fierce and reckless, as well as generous and warm-hearted, he was already imbued with the pride of a profession that he fancied he disdained, and affected by the influence of a companionship that in reality he loathed. He saw himself now a man of importance. His step grew yet lighter, and his mien more elate. "Niger," said he, turning suddenly, as he had now threaded the crowd, "we have often quarrelled. We are not matched against each other, but one of us, at least, may reasonably expect to fall. Give us thy hand." "Most readily," said Sosia, extending his palm. "Ha! What fool is this? Why, I thought Niger was on my heels." "I forgive the mistake," replied Sosia, condescendingly. "Don't mention it. The error was easy. I and Niger are somewhat of the same build." "Ha, ha! That is excellent. Niger would have slit thy throat had he heard thee." "You gentlemen of the arena have a most disagreeable mode of talking," said Sosia. "Let us change the conversation." "Va, va," said Leyden impatiently. "I am in no humour to converse with thee." "Why, truly," returned the slave, "you must have serious thoughts enough to occupy your mind. Tomorrow is, I think, your first essay in the arena. Well, I am sure you will die bravely." "May thy words fall on thine own head," said Leyden superstitiously, for he by no means liked the blessing of Sosia. "Die! No, I trust my hour is not yet come." "He who plays at dice with death must expect the dog's throw," replied Sosia maliciously. "But you are a strong fellow, and I wish you all imaginable luck, and so, vale." With that the slave turned on his heel and took his way homeward. "I trust the rogue's words are not ominous," said Leyden musingly. "In my zeal for my father's liberty, and my confidence in my own thews and sinews, I have not contemplated the possibility of death. My poor father! I am thy only son! If I were to fall—" As the thought crossed him, the gladiator strode on with a more rapid and restless pace, when suddenly, in an opposite street, he beheld the very object of his thoughts. Leaning on his stick, his form bent by care and age, his eyes downcast and his steps trembling, the grey-haired Medon slowly approached towards the gladiator. Leyden paused a moment. He divined at once the cause that brought forth the old man at that late hour. "Be sure it is I whom he seeks," thought he. "He is horror-struck at the condemnation of Olinthus. He more than ever esteems the arena criminal and hateful. He comes again to dissuade me from the contest. I must shun him. I cannot brook his prayers, his tears." These thoughts, so long to recite, flashed across the young man like lightning. He turned abruptly and fled swiftly in an opposite direction. He paused not till, almost spent and breathless, he found himself on the summit of a small acclivity which overlooked the most gay and splendid part of that miniature city. And as there he paused, and gazed along the tranquil streets glittering in the rays of the moon, which had just arisen, and brought partially and picturesquely into light the crowd around the amphitheatre at a distance, murmuring and swaying to and fro, the influence of the scene affected him, rude and unimaginative though his nature. He sat himself down to rest upon the steps of a deserted portico, and felt the calm of the hour quiet and restore him. Opposite and near at hand, the lights gleamed from a palace in which the master now held his revels. The doors were open for coolness, and the gladiator beheld the numerous and festive group gathered round the tables in the atrium; while behind them, closing the long vista of the illumined rooms beyond, the spray of the distant fountain sparkled in the moonbeams. There, the garlands wreathed around the columns of the hall; there, gleamed still and frequent the marble statue; there, amidst peals of jocund laughter, rose the music and the lay. Epicurean Song. Away with your stories of Hades, which the Flamen has forged to affright us. We laugh at your three maiden ladies, your fates, and your sullen Cocytus. Poor Jove has a troublesome life, sir, could we credit your tales of his portals; in shutting his ears on his wife, sir, and opening his eyes upon mortals. Oh, blessed be the bright Epicurus, who taught us to laugh at such fables. On Hades they wanted to moor us, and his hand cut the terrible cables. If then there's a Jove or a Juno, they vex not their heads about us, man. Besides, if they did, I and you know, 'tis the life of a god to live thus, man. What, think you the gods place their bliss, eh? In playing the spy on a sinner? In counting the girls that we kiss, eh? Or the cups that we empty at dinner? Content with the soft lips that love us, this music, this wine, and this mirth, boys, we care not for gods up above us. We know there's no God for this earth, boys. While Leyden's piety, which accommodating as it might be, was in no slight degree disturbed by these verses, which embodied the fashionable philosophy of the day, slowly recovered itself from the shock it had received, a small party of men, in plain garments and of the middle class, passed by his resting place. They were in earnest conversation, and did not seem to notice or heed the gladiator as they moved on. "Oh, horror on horrors!" said one. "Olinthus is snatched from us. Our right arm is lopped away. When will Christ descend to protect his own?" "Can human atrocity go farther," said another, "to sentence an innocent man to the same arena as a murderer? But let us not despair. The thunder of Sinai may yet be heard, and the Lord preserve his saint. The fool hath said in his heart there is no God." At that moment out broke again, from the illumined palace, the burden of the revelers' song. "We care not for gods up above us. We know there's no God for this earth, boys." Ere the words died away, the Nazarenes, moved by sudden indignation, caught up the echo, and in the words of one of their favorite hymns, shouted aloud, the warning hymn of the Nazarenes: "Around, about, forever near thee, God, our God, shall mark and hear thee. On his car of storm he sweeps. Bow, ye heavens, and shrink, ye deeps. Woe to the proud ones who defy him. Woe to the dreamers who deny him. Woe to the wicked, woe. The proud stars shall fail. The sun shall grow pale. The heavens shrivel up like a scroll. Hell's ocean shall bear Its depths of despair, each wave an eternal soul. For the only thing, then, that shall not live again is the corpse of the giant Time. Hark! the trumpet of thunder! Lo, earth rent asunder! And, forth on his angel throne, he comes through the gloom, the judge of the tomb, to summon and save his own. Oh, joy to care, and woe to crime! He comes to save his own. Woe to the proud ones who defy him! Woe to the dreamers who deny him! Woe to the wicked, woe. A sudden silence from the startled hall of revel succeeded these ominous words. The Christians swept on, and were soon hidden from the sight of the gladiator. Awed, he scarce knew why, by the mystic denunciations of the Christians, Leyden, after a short pause, now rose to pursue his way homeward. Before him, how serenely slept the starlight on that lovely city! How breathlessly its pillared streets reposed in their security! How softly rippled the dark green waves beyond! How cloudless spread, aloft in blue, the dreaming Campanian skies! Yet this was the last night for the gay Pompeii, the colony of the hoar Chaldean, the fabled city of Hercules, the delight of the voluptuous Roman. Age after age had rolled, indestructive, unheeded, over its head, and now the last ray quivered on the dial plate of its doom. The gladiator heard some light steps behind. A group of females were wending homeward from their visit to the amphitheater. As he turned, his eye was arrested by a strange and sudden apparition. From the summit of Vesuvius, darkly visible in the distance, there shot a pale, meteoric, livid light. It trembled an instant and was gone. At the same moment that his eye caught it, the voice of one of the youngest of the women broke out hilariously and shrill. "Tramp! Tramp! How gaily they go! Ho! Ho! For the morrow's merry show!" Book 5